Hip flexion extension. All of these you're going to see me do a passive stretch, whether it be supine, boom here for however long, 60 seconds, boom here. My left is a little bit more restricted, 60 seconds. Okay, and then you can progress another passive hip flexion, targeting hip flexors, rear foot elevated, half kneeling, flexing the butt with a twist and a turn and a reach. Again, it takes, I know I hate to say this, but it takes a lot of time to make adaptations, meaning when we hold our passive stretches, it's going to be about 60 to 120 seconds. I'm just going to walk you guys through this routine as quickly as possible because I don't want one of my batteries to die or my cameras to blow up. Okay, so passive. Okay, so on hip flexion. All right, now we'll do passive range holds. I'm going to do these standing. You can do these supine as well on your back, but again, now we're going to be training to gain that active control. So make sure that your spine is aligned, that your trunk is neutral. We don't want compensation, right? You're an athlete, so you're very, very good at compensating to complete the task. So right now the task is to gain active control of hip flexion. So now we get into hip flexion passive range. So we pull you into a passive range. So that's my passive range, a hip flexion standing. And now what we're going to do is we're going to hold. So we're going to actively control, engage the trunk and hold this range. 3, 2, 1, and we repeat. Passive range, pull all the way to the top as much as you can get, and then let go in 2, 1, hold 4, 3, 2, 1. Again, no compensations, right? So if we get to your passive range and you go to hold it and then you tilt back, that's a no bueno. So what we can do in that instance is prop you up against a wall, so your back is up against a wall, so you physically can't compensate with your trunk, and boom, passive range hold, 2, 1, passive range, now hold, 2, 1, good. I like to shoot for 5 seconds with the holds, play around with it. Okay, staying on hip flexion. We can do passive range liftoffs now. So whatever your passive range, it's going to look different for everybody. Prop you up. The goal is to get you as high as your passive range is. So let's see where mine is. Okay, so that's pretty much good there. And again, now we're in our hip flexion passive range of motion. And now we're doing lift off. So we lift off the block, 2, 1, back down. So you see there's minimal space there, okay? So that means that my blocks are good for where I want to be with my passive range of hip flexion. Lift, 3, 2, 1, back down. Lift, 3, 2, 1, back down. And I just use fists. You can use tennis balls to radiate tension. Lift, 3, 2, 1, down. Lift, 3, 2, 1, down. Good. That's a passive range lift off for hip flexion. Now for implementing flexion and extension, we can do PAILs, RAILs, progressive and regressive, isometrics. So if I were half kneeling here, okay, so I'm already in hip flexion, get that trail leg right around there's good. Use your hands up here. If you have like PVC pipes, great. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna think about our knee and our toe pulling this exercise mat forward. So that's an isometric hold of hip flexion. Everything's going to start to engage. Never shoot for 100% right off the bat. Slowly tease more effort into it, 10%, 30%. And again, we're using this and we're pulling from our hip flexor forward. Okay, we're not removing anything off the ground. We're just pulling our hip from our hip flexor. And then once you get to 100%, say we hold 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then we regress, which is hip extension in the opposite direction. So in flexion, we were trying to pull this exercise mat forward. Now we're thinking about the opposite, where we're taking the exercise mat and trying to push it backwards. Again, nothing is elevating. You'll see guys that want to elevate to get a little bit more leverage to accomplish the task of pushing the exercise mat backwards. That's not what we're going to do. And now we're going from our hip flexor. You're going to really start to contract or feel the contraction in your hip flexor, 50%, 70, and again, pushing it away. So it looks, I know there's not a whole lot of movement that you can visualize, but it looks like I'm doing that. Okay, then you'd switch. And when I go into hip flexion, I feel the flexor contract, and the butt cheek of the one that you're working on is really engaged. Contracting 50, 60%, 70, 80, 90. And again, these are going to be a lot slower in real time for you when you incorporate these in your routine. I'm just speeding these up for me. And now, once we get to 100% progressive this way in our flexion, we regress right into 100% into extension, pushing the mat away from you. Ooh, I've been sitting at a desk, this hurts. And then hold for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good. So that's PAILs, rails, hip flexion, hip extension. You can also do that in a split squat with your toe off the ground. Vertical angle from your ankle to your knee. Pull with the foot, but not removing the foot from the ground. Contract hip flexor into hip flexion, trying to pull this exercise mat forward, and then the opposite, regressive, pushing that away. And you should feel from your hip flexor contraction of in, extension, flexion, extension, but nothing else moves, right? So I'm not compensating to get this or this, staying there. Okay, so that's my routine for hip flexion, hip extension. If you want to do one more, you can get, I don't even know what this one would be called, here, and then hip extension without sacrificing any of the spine and the back rounding compensation. Lift up, hip extension, and down. Same thing for the other one. Lift up, and you're lifting from your flexor. Okay, getting extension from that. Okay, that's hip flexion, hip extension, mobility routine. Now we'll go hip internal, external rotation. So for me, I always start in my 90-90. So a big key point of the 90-90 is make sure your 90s are 90. 90 degrees here, 90 degrees here. Your hip bone is in line with your knee, and your knee is in line with your ankle. Hip bone in line with your knee, knee in line with your ankle. Okay, so we're looking good here. Now you'll see a lot of guys that go to do this for the first time and they're already falling, and if they do this, they have to like round contralateral tilt. So basically we want to just prop you up in a position that feels the most comfortable. So when we do our passive stretching for external and internal rotation, I'll prop myself up. You can even use 2 yoga blocks over here and go here, but you just want to make sure that you're turning your trunk to face forward and you're pressing 4 points in, knee, ankle, pressing those into the ground. We can also use tennis balls to give feedback. I put tennis balls, my lead knee. So say here for beginners, And then you can use 2 yoga blocks, prop up here. But this is the passive stretch. Hold for 2 minutes for external rotation. Okay, breathe, breathe. You can sink deeper as long as your spine doesn't roll. Okay, and pressing all 4 points into the ground. Then what we can do, internal rotation, is turn and face this rear leg and pull yourself closer. And this is where you'll start to feel a cramp. Get to that comfortable point. Again, still pressing in 4 points to the ground. Remember, passive stretch first. It's about 2 minutes. And then you can switch sides. Make sure your 90s are 90. For me, some reason, my left leg wants to get into a little bit more flexion. So I'm a little worse on this side. So use the yoga block to prop me up here. Dorsiflex both feet. Make sure your 90s are 90. Turn, get your sternum in line with your thigh and knee. Pressing all 4 points into the ground, using a tennis ball under your lead knee if you have to. Now we breathe here for 2 minutes. And now for internal rotation, passive. Turn and face, pull closer. Still pressing in that lead knee with that tennis ball. Okay, that's passive. Now we can do PAILs, RAILs, internal, external rotation, tennis ball. Okay. So we'll start external rotation, PAILs, RAILs on your lead leg. So PAILs, RAILs, it's a progressive isometric loading essentially. And what we want to do with external rotation is we want to really, it's very similar to the hip flexion extension. Start at 10% and then work your way all the way up to 100, then hold for whatever amount of time, and then go right into your regressive at 100%. So if we're going lead leg, hip external rotation, it's going to look like this. Prop yourself up, get as much leverage as you can. Now from this point, the trunk does not compensate to complete the task. Check the ego at the door, dorsiflex both feet. And now I'm going to start slamming the 2 points. I'm in the lead leg, ankle, knee into the ground at 10%. Work your way all the way up to 100. Once you get to 100, remember, still breathe, hold air tight, contract 100% to the ground. And now when I get to that desired time of at 100% of both into the ground, then I'm going to think about elevating from the ankle and knee both, right? So a lot of people will want to elevate and the knee is the only thing that comes up and the foot's still attached. You want to think about elevating this like so, right? So if you had a ball balanced on like your calf here, the ball wouldn't tilt. Now, this is where it gets complicated because a lot of people want to see a specific movement, and more oftentimes than not, you won't get a movement out of this, but you're still contracting the right muscles. So this is my rails contraction at 100%. That's literally what it looks like. Now you can do this another way as well. If you were staying on the left, you can go sideline, stand on the left, boom. Now we can get some elevation. You cleared space in the capsule, and then you can go back down, elevate. Okay, PAILs, RAILs, internal rotation. It's going to be the rear leg. Prop yourself up. Internal rotation. And then down into the ground. You can also do the same thing we did for hip flexion with passive range holds and lift-offs. So if that was my passive range for my right hip internal rotation, I would lift from there and then press into the blocks and lift again. For internal rotation, you can also do wait, that's not right. Where am I? Was I just on my right leg? I don't remember, to be honest with you. Okay. I need to get some on this side because now I'm feeling all weird. And now you can also do external rotation of the rear leg, where you're here slamming both points of the lead leg down using a tennis ball if you have to. Now this is active. This is what I possess actively. Now my hands are off the ground. Now if I give myself some stability, you can see that I can increase the range. Something that you can do, again, since we're trying to train active range of motion, keep these here, get to a point in your external rotation that you feel comfortable with, and then you can slowly remove the hands and breathe there and hold. Okay, you can also see that you can do some band resisted stuff to strengthen the hip capsule, and so on and so forth. I don't want to get too complicated with the internal and external rotation. Simplicity is key. You can also go from a bear sit and hip flow. So if you say you were to start in your 90-90 and then you started to proceed into like a shin box, a hip flow, hip switch, whatever you want to call it, connected to the ground, maximum amount of external rotation, and start to lift. Now once we get center, this is our bear sit. We can do a lot of things from here. You can go band resisted, internal and external, but here we're just going to flow over to the right side. You want to keep the heels in that same posture, so once you get to the other side, you should still be in the 90-90. I'm not. Now I am. And now we do the same thing. Pressing into the ground 2 points, get to your maximum amount, external rotation. This is actively. You can also do this passively with your hands behind you. External rotation, maxes out. We start to move. See that rear leg now, right foot starts to slide forward. So I need to address that. Okay, something I also like to do is getting into your 90-90 trunk posture. Starts to creep over your lead leg, and then from here, contract, slam 4 points into the ground, elevate hands, hold 4, 3, 2, 1, back down, get into a deeper range. And it's not this, you're leading with your sternum to your knee, keeping your chin in a double chin, keep a neutral spine throughout, and then elevate hands, hold. These are gonna be tough, okay? These are gonna be tough, it's gonna be a grind. This side I'm terrible on. Remember, sternum facing that lead thigh, elevate hands, pressing 4 points into the ground, back down, and then gain more range. Okay, so for me, that's really what it comes down to for my hip mobility. I do believe simplicity is key. I do this pretty much the same things every single day. Let's see. But yeah, I also wrote down, like, you can also stabilize too. So in those positions, you can get like a band and resist you going external rotation. You can get a band or get like some weight resisting internal rotation, right? So if we were to go right leg, right hip external rotation here, we can also resist that, put like a weight, something on it, even put like your own resistance here. This is for the guys that are starting to get good range of motion. You can resist that. right? And then you can do passive range lift-offs from here. Press in, lift off, hold, relax, press in, lift off, hold, relax, okay? So, like I said, a lot of this is just kind of learning these concepts, learning the importance, and then playing around with new things, implementing these. You're gonna get better at them, then you need to kind of challenge yourself a little bit, maybe more resistance, less hands on the ground, so on and so forth. So now for hamstrings, I will go, so you can go passive range holds, standing, getting to that range. You can also use like a kettlebell to pull yourself and do a deeper passive range, and then relax. Again, 2-second holds, ideal, or not 2 seconds, 2 minutes. And then same thing for like a pancake, for hamstrings. Push the kettlebell out, and then you can pull yourself in. Dorsiflex both feet. Here. Okay, that's passive range. You can also go, standing hamstring, PAILs, rails into a box. The sticks just help me like not compensate, right? Because I'm gonna probably want to move. So if I was here, now I'm gonna progressive isometric into the ground or into this box using my hamstring. So you feel the engagement of the hamstring. Now throughout this entire hamstring, PAILs, rails with the block, make sure that you're not compensating this way, okay? Set yourself up, neutral, 10% into the box, 20, 30, all the way up to 100. And then once we get to that 100, hold for a desired amount of time, and then think about lifting. Nothing of the trunk sacrifices to clear space, okay? Hamstring, PAILs, rails, straight leg, hamstring into the box, okay? And then T-spine. For T-spine, I do bretzel right over left. So a bretzel is like a pretzel. Take your rear leg, hook it, and you take this leg and you're pulling it. And you're trying to get both shoulders on the ground. After every exhale, try to get that right shoulder onto the ground. And also pulling the bottom leg into hip extension while you pull the top leg into hip flexion. Okay, that's a bretzel. You can do both sides. I can't because I got my transmitter on. And then you can also do, right? So this is gonna mimic segmentation and separation, and we'll talk about within the hip rotation and trunk rotation mechanics of the pitching delivery. Pelvis neutral, hips forward. Now I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna get as much separation as segmentation, pushing this in. Okay, same thing on this side. And once you get to that maximum amount of range, hold, breathe. Tell your body, hey, we got this. Good. And you can also do a seated spinal twist. So if you're on a chair, say there was a backrest, same thing, hips facing forward, and now I'd use the chair to pull myself into a deeper rotation of my trunk, and then I'd let go and see if I can own that. Same thing over here, pull, segmentation, create that thoracic spine stretch, and then hold that. Okay, all right guys, so Hopefully not too much to digest there.